Testing, testing.
Testing, testing.
I'm Margie Cannon. I'm a member of the Kentucky Nurses Association, District number 13. I am interviewing Mrs. Nadine Turner for the purpose of the KNA's collection of oral history. Miss Turner's address is 106 North 12th Street in Murray, Kentucky. She was born on August 30th, 1917. She attended nursing school at Norton Memorial Infirmary in Louisville, Kentucky, from where she graduated in 1943. Her license began as an RN in 1943. Mrs. Turner, could you tell us a little about a typical day in nursing school, something about your classes and your duties?
I'll break it down to 3 years because it was a 3-year program. The first year we were in class or nursing arts lab most of the day. We had a 3-month probation period, and following this period we had classes in addition to 2 to 4 hours a day practice. We carried out basic kinds of care, bathing and making beds and so forth. We had our biological and social sciences at Nazareth College, which is now, as you know, Spalding College. These were lectures and labs. We had very few field trips. I recall one field trip was to Jefferson County Health Department, and another one in our first year was to the florist shop, if you can imagine that today, because as nursing students, we took care of the patient's flowers. In our second year, we continued with classes and we rotated through the various clinical services, medical, surgical, pediatrics, maternity, and OR. We had more practice. In the latter part of our second year, we were in charge of a floor on either 3 to 11 or 11 to 7 shift. We had excellent supervisors and instructors. We might work the 11 to 7 shift and get up to go to class around 1 p.m. The third year we continued with few classes and did more clinical practice. We also affiliated either in public health or visiting nursing. I chose the VNA because I liked the home care that we gave patients in their homes. We did not have psychiatric affiliation. It was not required in the early 40s. We did have the formal lectures in psychiatry. You have to remember I was a student between 40 and 1943, and World War II started in 1941.
Ms. Turner, could you tell me a little about the lifestyle of the student? Were there any restrictions on your activities?
I never thought of my lifestyle as a nursing student as being restricted. We had parties, lots of parties in the nursing residence. We always had 2 dances per year at the downtown Sealback Hotel. And since this was during the war, we went to Fort Knox to dances, under chaperones, of course. We invited the fellows to our parties and dances. We also dated the interns. We played tennis a lot and went to the Y to swim. We had an organized student government association, and I was busy with the association, and as a student I was busy and yet very happy as a student.
Oh, that's very interesting. What about your first job in nursing?
Well, I graduated in 1943, and prior to graduation I had already made the decision to join the Army Nurse Corps. However, I worked at Norton for several months before joining as a general staff nurse. My salary, if I recall, was $72 a month. And some of the duties, of course, we were in charge of a floor, and my first job was in charge of a surgical floor on the 3 to 11 shift. I gave the medicines, did all the treatments, received orders from physicians, did all the charting, as we called it then. We say documentation now. And we had around 30 or 32 patients and had one aide. Everything the patient needed, the nurse did. The aide and I even rubbed the patients' backs at bedtime.
What, in regard to these areas, in other jobs that you have had since that initial job, can you tell me something about changes?
Well, I think that in some of the relationships to other professionals, we were very limited in that. Our relationships was mostly with physicians. We had an annual lecture by a nurse midwife from the Frontier Nursing Service each year, and we as students would always get around her and ask her 1,000 questions when she came. We had lectures by public health nurses. I suppose when we think of changes, one has to think where the healthcare system was during those years. But things were changing at a rapid pace because of the war. But following the war, some of the significant changes that took place, I think the RN became more of a manager of others. We saw so many ancillary workers come upon the scene, nurse aides, ward clerks, technicians, and the nurse was being pushed away from the patient. This was a gradual thing. She spent less time with the patients, and I'm happy that that is changing. I think another significant change since the 50s, we saw in the 50s, I think, nurse or clinical specialties, as all these specialties came about. We saw a need for more and better education, and in education, both formal and continuing education. I recall in the 50s, we pushed hard for in-service education. And in the 60s, we know that the youth became college-bound, and we pushed for more formal education. In the 70s, in addition, we started to push for continuing education. We have to remember that nursing grew out of a service hospital setting. So as time passed, we saw the need for the education of nurses in a college or universities. I would like to go back a bit and make a comment. I shall never forget, as a nursing student in the early 40s, Annie Goodrich came to Louisville to speak. I believe it was at a KNA convention. I'm not quite sure about that, but anyway, our director of nursing had all of the students there to hear her. She spoke at the old Henry Clay Hotel in Louisville, and she made one remark that had a great influence upon my career, I believe. She said, "I see the university as a great reservoir for the education of nurses." And she explained why, and she gave a great speech. Of course, we all, from our history of nursing, know what a great lady and leader she was.
Miss Turner, now could you tell me a little about your own career in nursing? Specifically, you've told us about your first job at Norton's. What did you do when you left Norton's and went to do Army nursing?
Well, I went into the Army Nurse Corps. I was inducted at Fort Knox, and we worked at Fort Knox on the general floors for several months, and then we went overseas, and here I did what we call, I suppose today, general nursing, but also I was chosen to do anesthesia. And this was under the classes and practice under the anesthesiologist of our hospital overseas. Following the war, I did 311 supervision.
Where was that?
That was in Madisonville, my hometown. It was at Hopkins County Hospital. Following that job, I wanted to go to school, so I enrolled at Vanderbilt University and obtained a BS in nursing at Vanderbilt University. Following that, I did clinical teaching, and I went into nursing education. We had, back in those days, we had a lot of hospital schools of nursing. So I became an instructor, an educational director, and eventually got into nursing, administration of schools of nursing and hospital schools of nursing. I still had a yearning, though, to get back into the nursing service. I really preferred nursing service to nursing education. So I planned my position. This was before I married. So I planned my positions to sort of transcend that from nursing education back into nursing service. And I did that at the University of Texas Medical Center in Galveston. But this time I was married, and I continued as director of nursing at hospital here in western Kentucky. And we eventually, of course, moved to Murray some 22 years ago, and I was director of nursing service at Murray-Callaway County Hospital for 18 years. And during this time here in Murray, I again returned to the classroom and got a master's in education at Murray State University.
Let me hear about some other changes, Ms. Turner, that you've seen in healthcare over the years.
Well, first, I think we have to think that nursing has to be within the mainstream of what is taking place in our society. Trends change, needs of people change, life expansion has been tremendous and had a real impact upon the profession. And I think we have to think at the beginning of the space age, we saw much research in many scientific areas. For instance, cardiac monitors is a direct outgrowth of the space age. There's been a great division, as you know, between what we call the professional and technical aspects of nursing. We will continue to explore this. Look how many years it's been since the ANA position paper appeared. We upgraded standards of practice and standards of care. Peer review came into existence. And just look at the field of pharmacology. We had very few drugs when I was a young nurse. I recall how excited we all were when penicillin came on the market, and the sulfa drugs in the early 40s. Some of the other changes, of course, we talk about the nursing process, which carefully thought out methodologies, audits. The Code of Ethics has been revised many times. I was on the ANA Ethical Standards Committee in the 60s when the code was revived. Another great impact upon the profession and upon nurses was the enactment of the Medicare law in the early 60s. We saw expansion of hospital beds. We saw much recruitment that occurred in the nursing profession and career-oriented. Specialties, another great change. Nurses began to specialize: cardiac, respiratory, pediatrics, maternity, the nurse practitioners, and there are just many others. All of this led to intensive care units, recovery rooms, team nursing. In the 60s and 70s was a great explosion of knowledge through technological advancement. Organ transplants, artificial heart, all these things affect us as nurses. and we have to learn how to deal with it, both from the clinical and ethical point of view. And today, the one big trend and change is the outpatient surgery, which has reached its peak. There,
Miss Turner, tell me something about the past and laws and legislation as they have affected changes in nursing practice in
well,
Kentucky.
as to the law, there has been many changes in the law. First, we have to think of our law's real purpose, and is to protect and safeguard the citizens of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. That's the real purpose. A law regulates and controls the practice of nursing. Kentucky had its first Practice Act in 1914. It was amended in 1916, 1920, revised 1942 and 1950. Now, the 1950 bill combined the RN and LPN into one law. In 1958, KNA established a realistic long-range goal toward a mandatory licensure. Things took place in rapid succession. There was a vital plank in the KNA platform each year at the convention that we would continue to work toward mandatory licensure. In 1960, a professional practice committee was appointed by amending the bylaws of the association, and this brought about better understanding and acceptance of nursing as a professional practice. In 1961, the enabling resolution was again passed to work toward getting the best possible legislation governing the practice of nursing. Our goal advanced into 1963 General Assembly. The bill did not pass. KNA introduced legislation appropriate then for a mandatory licensure. We had to work on the revision in 1965, and it was passed by the legislature and became effective July the 1st, 1966, as a mandatory Nurse Practice Act. I was president of KNA 1964 through 1966. I was very active in getting this bill passed, along with many, many nurses throughout the state. I probably should leave the subject of legislation here, but other efforts and revisions have been introduced since.
Miss Turner, you have obviously been very involved in the association, having been at one time president of KNA. Could you tell me something about the changes in the association over the years that you've been member?
Well, I think KNA has always been in the mainstream of changes in our state and society that affect the health of individuals and the welfare of nurses. The bylaws are kept up to date, and we as nurses have a responsibility to see that all people have better nursing care. The association, through organizational structure, updates standards of practice. In my time, we called them FS&Q, Function, Standards, and Qualifications. We've seen progress in the economic security programs. Legislation we've mentioned. Promotion of membership has long been a problem. I wish we knew the answer to that one. We've had, I think, a good financial system. We've had committees and commissions and changes throughout the years. It's all here if only more nurses would take advantage of the KNA activities. Sure, there were problems when I was active, but nurses have that capacity to resolve problems. The association to me was a very vital part of my growth and understanding in nursing. It was a wonderful time during my active years to be part of a viable, dynamic association. I don't really know how many years I've been a member. I know over 27 years in Kentucky, And in other states where I've worked, I've probably been a member of ANA for over 35 years. I joined because I believed in the association, and I'm sure Annie Goodrich influenced my thinking as a young nurse. Also, my director of nursing as a young student believed in association, and she too was a great influence. One thing I don't want to forget, at the 1965 KNA convention, a resolution was passed that each member contribute $10 toward the establishment of a building fund to provide appropriate headquarters for KNA building. I was on the search committee to find a suitable lot. In 1967, I was so pleased to give the welcome remarks at the dedication of our present KNA building. It was a beautiful autumn day when we dedicated the building. It seems impossible it was 20 years ago. Two things stand out during my presidency of KNA. I think the mandatory law was passed and a new headquarters building.
Ms. Turner, we've talked about the past, about the time that you've spent in nursing over the past 35 years. Where do you think nursing will be by the year 2000?
Oh dear, do you realize that is only 13 years away? Where was nursing 13 years ago, that 1974? If only we could look into a crystal ball, another decade will have passed. Probably ANA position paper, written so long ago, will become a reality. I believe there will be two distinct state board examinations, one for the professional nurse and one for the technical nurse. I believe there will be more independent practitioners. Nurses will become more involved in the political process, office seekers. And nurses will have to cope with the entire big subject of anatomical gifts, both as to ethics and how she views this, knowledge required to care for these patients. We know that computers are here to stay. Who knows, maybe the nurse may be required to take a course in computer science, and maybe she has already. The financial needs and resources for educational purposes will continue to have a great impact upon the profession. Certain segments of our society need long-range planning, and nurses will have to be involved in this. And I'm thinking here of care of the elderly, the newborn, child, adult abuse centers, and so forth. The drug scenes, people in need here, malnutrition, hungry. We know that hunger is throughout the world. The nuclear age, what's going to happen there. We've only just mentioned a few, only seems like it's only the tip of the iceberg. But nurses will arise to the occasion and be in there fighting. There is only one warning, however. They must have a vision as a profession and not be caught up and absorbed within another group or profession. I shall always pray that a warm, humanistic environment prevails.
Thank you very much, Ms. Turner.